In the vast and golden lands of Zabara, a mighty kingdom ruled over the savannah. There lived a kind and brave young girl named Ebony. Though she was an orphan, she had royal blood and a bright spirit that everyone admired. But not everyone wanted her to shine. Her step-aunt, Queen Lemba, was full of jealousy and fear. Lemba wanted the throne all to herself, and Ebony stood in her way. So the queen told lies. She accused Ebony of witchcraft, a crime punished by death. The palace guards dragged Ebony in chains through the streets. People watched in silence, too scared to speak. Ebony cried out for truth, but no one helped her. They took her to the edge of the kingdom, where wild cliffs hung over deep valleys, and below roared a lion pit, a dark place where traitors met their end. With no trial and no mercy, they pushed Ebony into the pit. The court turned away, sure the lions would rip her apart. Her screams echoed across the valley, and soon there was only silence. Queen Lemba smiled, thinking her path to power was clear. The kingdom mourned not for Ebony, but for the shame they believed she brought. But deep in that lion pit, something unexpected happened. The lions did not kill. One lioness stepped forward, looked into Ebony's eyes, and gently licked her wounds. The story of Zabara was about to change forever, but no one knew it yet. Ebony's scream echoed through the valley like thunder. The cliffs were quiet after that. The guards turned their backs and walked away. The people of Zabara bowed their heads, thinking the lions had done their deadly job. Whispers moved like smoke across the kingdom, the witch is gone. In the palace, Queen Lemba sat on her throne with a fake tear in her eye and a real smile on her lips. The court pretended to be sad, but no one wept for Ebony's life. They only cried for the shame they believed she brought to the royal family. She was cursed, they whispered. She deserved it. In every corner of the palace, people spoke of her death. They thought her story had ended in the lion pit. But they were wrong. So very wrong. Down below, in the shadows where only the brave dare to look, something strange had happened. The lions didn't tear her apart. They didn't growl or snarl. They stood still. Their golden eyes stared at the broken girl lying in the dust. Ebony lay on the hard ground, breathing slowly, her body shaking, her heart pounding. She was sure it was the end. She closed her eyes, waiting for sharp teeth. But none came. Then, from the pack, one lioness stepped forward. Her steps were calm, her eyes soft. She sniffed Ebony gently, then did something no one could have imagined. She licked Ebony's wounds. Softly. Slowly. Like a mother would her cub. Ebony opened her eyes, confused and scared. Was this a trick? But the lioness stayed calm. She lay beside Ebony, wrapping her warmth around her. One by one, the other lions came closer. They didn't attack. They sat beside her, guarding her like she was one of their own. The night grew quiet. The stars blinked above, and the moon watched silently. Ebony, once a girl thrown away by the world, was now surrounded by creatures no one could tame. In the forest beyond the cliffs, the wind carried whispers. A hunter in the distance paused, his ears catching something strange. Not a roar. Not a cry. But a song. A soft, humming sound, like the earth itself was singing. The song of survival. Of something ancient waking up. The spirits of the land had seen what the humans had done, and they chose not to stay silent. Ebony was not dead. She was not finished. She had been chosen. Protected. Saved. The people of Zabara didn't know yet. They went on with their lives, thinking the problem was gone. But far from the palace, under the eyes of the stars and the watch of the lions, a different truth was growing. A girl had been thrown to die, but death had refused her. The wild had taken her in. And one day soon, the whispers would become roars. Back in the kingdom of Zabara, the palace bells rang loud and proud. Queen Lemba, now wearing the crown of Queen Regent, stood high on the steps, smiling like she had won a great battle. The people clapped, the drums beat hard, and the dancers spun like wind across the stone floors. A grand feast was called. Meat roasted over fires. Wine poured like rivers. Lemba raised her cup and sang songs about cleansing the palace and removing dark spirits. She laughed with her nobles and spoke of a new beginning, one without Ebony, one where her power would never be challenged again. "We are free now," she said with a proud voice. "The shame is gone. The witch is no more." But far beyond the palace walls, deep in the villages and farmlands, whispers began to rise. They started soft, like wind through dry grass. Then louder. At first, they were easy to ignore, just old stories, some said. Just talk. But then a hunter came running into the village square, his eyes wide, his skin pale with fear and wonder. He spoke with a shaky voice, swearing by the ancestors that he had seen something strange in the forest. "A girl," he said. "A girl walking, with lions." People laughed. Some told him to stop lying. Others looked worried. "What do you mean?" a woman asked. "Are you drunk?" "I swear," the hunter cried. "I saw her with my own eyes. A girl. Tall. Strong. Her hair flying in the wind. And lions, real lions, walking beside her like guards." The villagers grew silent. Mothers held their children close. Elders whispered to each other. Ebony's name was not spoken, but it hung heavy in the air. Could it be? Was it possible? No one knew for sure, but fear crept in like smoke under a door. Back in the palace, Queen Lemba danced to drums and drank wine from golden cups. But her smile began to fade when her advisor bent down and whispered in her ear, "There are rumors. A hunter says he saw something." Lemba's eyes narrowed. "A trick," she said quickly. "Just a story. Lies." But that night, as she stood alone on her palace balcony, something cold wrapped around her heart. The wind carried a sound, not a scream, not a song, but a roar. Far off, deep in the trees, but real. Her hands tightened on the railing. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound stayed with her. The kingdom she thought she had cleaned was not done with ghosts. And the girl she thought she had buried may not be buried at all. Deep in the forest where no palace walls could reach, Ebony opened her eyes to a new life. She was alive. The lioness who had saved her now walked beside her like a shadow. The lions stayed close, always watching, always guarding. They brought her food, led her to water, and taught her how to move through the wild without fear. Ebony, once thrown away like dirt, now slept under the stars and woke with the roar of the jungle. Days passed, then weeks. The pain in her body began to fade. Her heart, once broken, began to burn with something new, strength. One morning, the lions led her to a small hut hidden deep between ancient trees. Smoke rose from the roof, and strange symbols were carved into the stones. Sitting outside was an old woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She looked at Ebony like she had been expecting her all along. Her name was Mama Jumo. Years ago, the same palace that betrayed Ebony had called her dangerous and thrown her into exile. They said she was mad. But she was more than that. She was a warrior. A priestess. A keeper of secrets the royals feared. And now, she had found Ebony. "You live because the spirits said so," Mama Jumo said. "You are not prey. You are prophecy." From that day forward, Ebony began to train. Mama Jumo taught her how to fight, not just with swords, but with her mind and her spirit. She learned how to move without sound, how to strike with speed, and how to read the wind. She meditated by the river. She practiced under moonlight. She screamed into the night sky, letting go of fear, letting in fire. The lions watched every lesson. Sometimes they joined, circling her like dance partners, testing her reflexes. Other times, they lay beside her as she slept, protecting her from the ghosts of the past. Mama Jumo told her the truth about the palace, the lies, and the stolen throne. She showed Ebony how power is not just taken, it is earned. You were never weak, she said. They were simply afraid of your light. Years passed. Ebony grew taller, stronger, wiser. The girl who once cried in chains was gone. In her place stood a warrior of the wild, with eyes like fire and a heart that refused to break. She no longer walked in fear. She walked in purpose. She no longer hid her scars. She wore them like armor. Every cut, every bruise, every tear had shaped her into something unstoppable. One evening, as the sun set and the lions roared in the distance, Mama Jumo looked at her and said, "The time is near. The kingdom that threw you away will soon see what it created." And Ebony, standing tall with the lioness beside her, whispered, "I am ready." 10 years passed. Zubara changed, but not in the way the people had hoped. Queen Lemba ruled with a heavy hand. She smiled in public but crushed any who dared to speak against her in secret. The kingdom's spirit had faded. The drums were quieter. The people whispered more than they sang. But every 10 years, the great crown festival returned, the ancient tradition where those of royal blood could come forward and challenge the throne. It was a day of celebration, color, and power. Warriors came from far places. Dancers filled the streets. The air buzzed with hope, fear, and curiosity. No one expected anything strange this year. Lemba felt safe. Confident. She wore her finest jewels and prepared to show her strength once more. Trumpets sang through the air. The gates of the capital opened wide, and people gathered from every corner of Zubara to witness the sacred event. The royal guard stood tall. The sky was clear. Everything seemed perfect. Then it happened. A hush fell over the crowd. Eyes turned to the main road leading into the palace square. Dust rose slowly from the earth, like a storm approaching. A single figure appeared in the distance. A cloaked woman, face hidden beneath a deep hood, walked calmly through the crowd. But she was not walking alone. She was riding a lion. Gasps filled the air. Children stared. Elders dropped their walking sticks. The lion moved with quiet pride, its golden eyes scanning the crowd, not angry, but calm. People stepped back in fear and awe. The cloaked woman did not speak. She did not wave. She simply rode through the crowd like she belonged there. And something deep in everyone's chest said, she did. Queen Lemba stood frozen on her throne platform. Her wine cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Her lips moved but no words came out. The advisors around her began to murmur. "Who is she?" one whispered. "It can't be," said another. The lion stopped at the edge of the royal steps. The woman stepped down slowly. Her boots touched the earth like thunder. She pulled back her hood, and silence turned into shock. Gasps became cries. It was Ebony. Older, stronger, sharper. Her eyes held fire. Her face told a story of pain, survival, and power. The lion stood behind her like a guardian. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. "I am here," Ebony said, her voice calm but fierce. "I am royal blood. I am prophecy. And I challenge the throne." People didn't know whether to cheer or run. But deep inside, their hearts stirred. Something old had returned. Something true. The drums began to beat again, slow but rising. The festival was no longer just a tradition. It had become a reckoning. Ebony had come back, not as a ghost, but as the storm the kingdom never saw coming. The palace courtyard stood still. It was as if time had stopped. Not a drum beat. Not a voice. Even the wind held its breath. All eyes were locked on the woman standing tall at the royal steps, her lion silent but strong behind her. Queen Lemba's face turned pale. Her hands trembled. The blood in her veins felt like ice. She leaned forward slightly, squinting, hoping it was just a trick, a look-alike, a madwoman playing games. But deep in her bones, she knew the truth. Someone in the royal court whispered, "She's dead, she was thrown to the lions." Another voice answered, "But the lions walk with her now." Ebony's eyes met Lemba's, not with hate, but with clarity. Calm, like a storm that had already made peace with its damage. She stepped forward, her voice steady, but filled with power that made even the guards grip their spears tighter. "I am not dead," she said. "You buried your conscience, not me. You killed the truth, but it didn't stay silent. It grew. In the wild. In fire. In me." The lion behind her let out a low, deep growl. Not loud, but strong enough to shake the hearts of even the bravest soldiers. No one moved. No one dared to raise a hand. They could all feel it, this wasn't just a woman. This was a reckoning wrapped in royal blood. Lemba tried to speak, but her voice cracked. She can't be allowed. But it was too late. A sound rose from the crowd. A shuffling, soft at first, then louder. One by one, villagers, nobles, even palace workers, began to kneel. Not out of fear, but out of awe. They looked at Ebony with wide eyes, not as a ghost, but as something greater. A survivor. A queen chosen by the wild itself. They had heard stories. Whispers in the wind. Rumors of a girl saved by lions, trained by spirits. And now, she stood before them, alive, fierce, undeniable. The guards looked at each other, confused. Some lowered their weapons. Others stepped back. The lion growled again, and even the royal banner behind Lemba fluttered hard in the wind, as if it too was ready to fall. Ebony looked at the people kneeling. Her face softened, just a little. "I did not come to bring war," she said. "I came to bring truth. I came to remind you who I am." The crowd began to chant softly, her name, over and over. "Ebony! Ebony!" Queen Lemba backed away slowly, her crown heavy, her lies louder than ever in her mind. She had buried a girl, yes. But the wild had returned a queen. And as the lion sat proudly at the base of the royal steps, it was clear to all, Zubara's true leader had come home. The silence in the palace was heavy, but Ebony's voice cut through it like a blade. She looked at the crowd, then at Queen Lemba, and said clearly, "I call upon the old challenge." Gasps echoed from every corner. The old challenge was ancient law, older than Lemba's crown, older than the palace itself. It allowed any royal blood to demand a trial by three things: wisdom, combat, and public judgment. It was rare. Dangerous. Sacred. And Ebony had every right to claim it. Queen Lemba's face twisted in fear and anger. "You dare," she spat. "You think you can outwit me? Defeat me?" But her voice cracked again. Deep down, she knew her lies couldn't stand forever. The council had no choice. The law was clear. The people gathered. The drums began to beat again, slow and strong. First came the trial of wisdom. A council elder asked both women riddles, questions of justice, history, and leadership. Lemba answered with pride, but Ebony answered with truth, her words simple, wise, and honest. The crowd nodded with every answer. This was no pretender. This was a queen who had lived both pain and purpose. Next came the trial of combat. Lemba's finest warriors stepped forward, dressed in golden armor. They laughed at Ebony, thinking she was still the weak girl they threw to the lions. But Ebony didn't flinch. She moved like wind, fast and sharp. Mama Jumo's training lived in every strike. The lion roared as she fought, and one by one, the warriors fell. She didn't kill them, only disarmed, humbled, and left them staring at her with disbelief. Then came the final part, the judgment of the people. Ebony stood before the crowd, her chest rising and falling, blood on her blade, truth in her eyes. She reached into her cloak and pulled out something small but powerful, the royal seal, once pinned on her by her father, long believed lost forever. It had been with her in the lion's den, and she had kept it all these years. "This was mine," she said, holding it high. "Before the lies. Before the chains. You tried to erase me. But truth remembers." Then, slowly, she revealed the letters from the late king, proof that Ebony was the rightful heir, and that Lemba had used false accusations to steal the throne. The crowd broke into shouts and cries. Some wept. Others raised their hands in prayer. Lemba screamed, "Lies! Lies!" but no one listened anymore. The people had seen enough. They rose, not just from their knees, but from their silence. Farmers. Fighters. Elders. Even palace guards stepped forward and dropped their spears in front of Ebony. The sky rumbled above as if the heavens themselves approved. Ebony stood tall, the lion at her side, fire in her soul. The challenge was over. The truth had won. And the people knew, the throne belonged to her. The skies above Zubara turned dark with clouds as thunder rolled across the savannah. But the people did not run. They stood together, their eyes full of hope and pride. The drums beat louder than ever, and the chants of Ebony's name rose like fire into the air. The palace gates, once symbols of fear under Queen Lemba's rule, now opened wide for their true queen. Ebony walked through them with grace and strength, the royal seal shining on her chest and the lioness at her side. The same lion that once saved her now guarded her like family. Inside the palace, the royal crown, untouched for years, was brought forward by the elders. Ebony knelt, but not in weakness. She knelt for her people, to show she would serve, not rule with cruelty. As the crown was placed on her head, lightning flashed in the sky, as if nature itself was blessing the moment. The people cheered. Some wept. Others raised their hands and sang. The throne had finally returned to someone worthy. Lions now sat at the palace gates, no longer feared but respected. They walked the grounds freely, symbols of justice and strength. Ebony's rule began not with war, but with peace, a promise that truth would guide Zubara again. The girl who had once been thrown away as prey had not only survived, she had risen. Stronger. Braver. Queen. And now, she didn't just walk with the lions. She led them.